Hi, good afternoon. It's Sunday afternoon, and I've just listened to Gary Stevens' most recent video. Doing quite a lot of videos these days in conjunction with Gary Stevens and his chats about starting a wealth tax. And he's getting very excited. He feels like he's doing very well, and I think he certainly is. It seems very clear that the idea of a wealth tax is very much arriving into the lexicon, into the dialogue, into the discourse of the British political class. Last week he had on a guy called Gabriel Zucman, who's a very interesting guy, talking about the same kind of thing, but from France rather than the UK, the tale of two cities, you might like to say, Charles Dickens. But this one today is called UK Wealth Tax in 2026, and it's really good listen. I recommend you listen to it. Things are progressing excitingly, shall we say. But towards the end of the video, he talks about a great change in societal structure in terms of the abolition of slavery a few hundred years ago, where transatlantic slavery was seen for what it is in terms of exploitation, and there was a movement, shall we say, amongst the public and the people, and it officially became abolished. So before we look at what it transitioned into at this time, let's just get really clear about slavery, right? So if you think about an archetypal, like the classic slave plantation, actually a really good film you can watch, a couple of pounds, couple of euros, couple of dollars online. It's called The Jones Plantation. I say really good. It's quite low budget, one or two ropey actors. But in terms of the message and the way the story transpires, is really good, because it gives you an idea about this transition from slavery to capitalism. And but back at slavery, it's very historic, right? Thousands of years of slavery. You can look at the Romans around Europe, or you can look at the great Mel Gibson film. I did a video a few months ago where the Aztecs, Mayans, one of the Central American empires, collect their slaves from the village in the jungle. And you see very starkly about this situation where a load of people are put to work under fear of death, right? Huge oppression, huge exploitation. And it's very clear and it's very stark. If you don't work, then you get whipped or tortured or even worse, killed. So if you get into the theory of it, what you're talking about is maximum gain through exploitation. And you get into theory, economic theory, you can talk about surplus, which is another way of saying profit, right? And so slavery is pure capitalism, if you want to say it that way, right? It's pure exploitation, pure surplus for the minimal amount of expenditure or input. You have to give the slaves a bit of food and maybe a roof over the head in winter. Minimal amounts of transactional return, you can gain the most profit. Okay, so you talk about the classic slave plantations. This film, the Jones Plantation, is one of these farms or plantations, and it's cotton, right? And so these workers, slaves, serfs, whatever you want to call them, collect all the cotton, and they make all this profit for the owners, the plantation owners, to live a very luxurious and opulent and comfortable, to say the least, life, thanks to all the work that they're gleaning from the slaves. Okay? But it's not fair. Fairness. I was a teacher for many years, and kids from a very early age, they totally understand fairness. It's really interesting. It's very instinctive understanding fairness, right? And so this time that Gary Stevens is talking about, this transitional time when slavery was abolished officially, and then in comes this substitute called capitalism, okay? And this monetary system takes the place of the whip as motivation, if you like. In the slavery times, the motivation was fear, 100% fear of physical assault. If you don't do as you're told, then this happens to you. I still remember it from my schooling days. Very similar philosophy on life. And it changed to economics. And if you do your day's work, you therefore get money. Sounds much better, right? Because it's a much more carrot for the donkey instead of the stick for the donkey, right? You earn money is the verb we use. But I want to tell you an example. I want to bring up an example. Here in Wales, where I live, South Wales, a lot of coal mines. We say the valleys. And the valleys were, for a long, long time, many, many decades, if not centuries, very resourceful and rich in coal mines and coal resources. And I remember this from when I was quite young. It's really opened my eyes to an aspect or an understanding of economics, that the coal mines and the owners of the coal mines introduced economics to the mines, just locally, microeconomics. So the people who did the coal mining were paid in, let's just keep it simple, I don't know exactly what the currency was, but we'll call it credits, coal mining credits, right? So the coal miners would spend, perhaps 5-6 days a week down the pit, digging the mines and collecting all the coal for the owners to then sell, internationally or whatever it was. Again, similarly to the owners of the slave plantation, getting the maximum amount of profit and wealth and luxurious goods and opulence and, et cetera, et cetera. And this economic system, we call them the coal mining credits, were distributed to the miners for their efforts digging up the coal. So that's the first really important point to get hold of, right? Is that this credit system was initiated, established, and distributed by the people who owned the mines, right? It's this mathematical, statistical, abstract numbers system that is initiated and brought into play by these coal miner owners, right? And on the coal mine, within the grounds, if you like, of the coal mining area, lived the miners and their families. And there was one or two shops in and around the coal mine. And the coal miners could use their coal mining credits, the currency, the money of the coal mine, to buy food and, bits and bobs, things they needed from the shops. And the shops were owned by the coal mine owners. Okay? So this credit system was circulating, with currency, right, like the water, moving around this coal mine. But the coal miners, the workers, the slaves, they couldn't use this currency anywhere else, only at the shops. There weren't many of them, 2 or 3 perhaps, owned by the owner themselves. So this very sort of fake system of remuneration, of earning, of bettering yourselves through economics came into play and convinced the workers, perhaps not all of them, that it was a much better situation than the previous slavery situation. But what do you got? And this is where that film, The Jones Plantation, makes it a really good point. What you got is a duping, is a contrived fakery that establishes exactly the same system as the previous slavery one, but masked and covered by this idea of earning money. And so when we look at this sort of from a more macro situation, and you think of in history what happened when there was an invasion. So here in the British Isles, just as an example, there's others to choose from. But let's go with the Norman Conquest, 1066, a very interesting and famous conquest of Britain by these. Well, the Norman comes from Norse, right? So it's very much a Viking situation. The Normandy's North France, but it was at a very strong connections with the Scandinavian Viking tribes, shall we call them. And interesting, there was a two-pronged attack from the northeast, Stamford Bridge, nothing to do with Chelsea football, from the northeast of England, very similar time to the Norman attack from the south. And the king at the time, King Harold, he had to do a very famous march from the north to the south within a couple of weeks in order to fight on two fronts, and it failed and the Normans came in. So the Norman king, the famous conqueror, William the Conqueror, William the First of England, he killed the previous king, Harold, and took over. And what he did was introduce a regime of fear and created this sort of strata of hierarchy whereby him and his marauding, invading, murderous pals were the boss group, and all the locals of the island were beneath them in terms of the slaves or the workers or the serfs or whatever you want to call it. And this economic system was established, as usual, very common throughout history. There's not the only example, plenty of these, whereby the people had to work, and then the fruit of their labor, the produce, whatever you want to call it, whether that was food, whether that was artisanship, like, I don't know, building houses or making tools or whatever it might be, the king and his friends, very much from a mafia extortion situation, would, because they were stronger and more powerful and had that fear factor, would collect whatever they liked from the slaves or the serfs or the workers, whatever you want to call them, employees, with that carrot and the stick idea, the stick, the fear motivation for the people to keep going, working hard, or else, right? And the best way to do this, to keep it simple, is to introduce, just like the coal mines, this monetary economic credit system. Okay, the credit system covers everything, and with a tax situation, you have to pay your taxes to the king, and this keeps the king and his pals rich and in a lap of luxury, and it keeps everybody else on a lower strata. There might be degrees. Interesting with the coal mines, right? You had the house slaves as opposed to the field slaves, and the house slaves, because they felt privileged because they were at a higher level than the field slaves, would actually help the owners subdue the bigger numbers of the field slaves. You can think of these the class system with capitalism that we have today, right? The middle class are more privileged than the working class, right? And therefore the middle class are much more loyal to the system than the lower classes. But when we get to Gary Stevenson's points here, and he's looking at introducing this wealth tax, because the idea here, and this is the crux of it, what I question, is that the point of economics is not that everybody can earn and do well. The point of economics is to maintain that previous hierarchical system, those that are privileged and those are much less privileged. And so if you're taxing the very rich, the super rich, as he calls them, the aristocracy, whatever you want to call them, the elites of the society, it's a contradiction in terms in a way, because the point of economics and the point of capitalism is to maintain that privilege hierarchical structure. It's a brilliant Italian woman called Clara Mattai, and she talks about this very clearly. She talks about how austerity and that inequality is essential for the maintenance of the capitalist system. In exactly the same way, in that in a slavery system, it's contradiction in terms to think that the slaves can sort of vote in a system that creates a level playing field, or puts one of the slaves ahead of one of the owners. And just to conclude this video today, I certainly believe, I certainly agree with Clara Mattai, that the point of economics at a very fundamental level, and a very opaque and it's often difficult to realize sense, is that it maintains this hierarchical strated tier system, And there's a lot of interesting evidence to point out that from the Norman Conquest, 1066, 1,000 or so years ago, the same families are still the wealthiest families in the UK, in Britain, in the British Isles, as it was back in the Norman times, which proves the point to a certain extent that economics isn't a meritocracy where you can work hard and get your way up. The point of economics, the point of capitalism, is to hide slavery, and that slavery idea is still very much a fact. Like the example with the coal mines, that the economic system is a fake system. It's a ruse. It dupes. It's a duplicitous system to keep everybody believing that it's a much more fair system than the slavery system that it masks, because it basically very much is slavery. And Gary Stevenson's point is tax wealth, not work. Well, the reason why wealth isn't taxed is because those people with all the money can buy all the influence and buy all the property and the assets, and then they can charge rent. A very small and micro example is if I own a house, I can invite people to come and live in it, and then they have to pay me because they're living in a house. I don't have to do any work. It's because I own that I collect the money. And so whether those people are nurses or doctors or nurses or teachers or train drivers or whatever it is, they have to hand over, a serious percentage of what they earn to me because I own. And this is why, I have some question marks about Gary Stevenson, because what he wants to do with this tax system, and I do agree, it's much fairer than this oligarchical system, is to collect all the money from the rich privateer oligarchs and put it into the government purse. Well, this is exactly what happened with Stalinist Russia, that instead of the individual oligarchs having all the money, the despot, the tyrant, Chairman Stalin? Anyway, whatever, Caesar, king, lord, whatever you want to call him, just controls the government where all the taxes arrive. So it's just sort of moving the problem to a different space, if you like. And perhaps the problem, when you step back a bit, zoom out and have a look from the overarching perspective, is the economic system, is capitalism in a nutshell. And, if Gary Stevenson gets what he wants and he wants that inequality to be finished and everybody's equal, well, then maybe you don't need money. Maybe the economic system becomes irrelevant because everybody is in harmony and in balance. Be interesting to see. We get to this Star Trek situation, as Captain Picard says, in the year 2020, in the 24th century or whatever it is. There is no longer a need for money as you know it in these capitalist times. We shall see.